Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seeds of Liberty podcast, episode 6. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher, and you can find all those links to theseedsofliberty.com. So today we're going to discuss taxation, the beautiful world of taxation. No small coincidence that yesterday was National Extortion Day, and we have to give our 2 cents to the discussion. We're going to discuss whether taxation is theft or whether it's a contribution, and what does it mean that it's your civic duty, and what is a civic duty if there ever was such a thing. So the way I look at these things, I think we first have to establish a baseline of definitions before you start in any debate. And what is a contribution or donation, right? Contribution is basically something given voluntarily, absent any coercion, right? There is no penalty or punishment if you do not give the contribution, right? That is the essential definition of a contribution, and on your own terms, basically. And so if we look at taxation as a contribution, right, we have to immediately ask, are there penalties if we don't pay? And of course, everybody understands that there is. You know, there's a great Adam Kokesh video I was watching recently on it, and he was asking people on the street, is taxation theft? And like, of course not. Well, what if I don't pay my taxes? Well, I think you have to. It's the law, isn't it? So then how can that be voluntary, right? Coercion does not equal consent, right? So, because a mugger puts a gun to your head and says, give me all your money or else I'm going to kill you, that doesn't mean he's giving you a choice, right? That's not the definition of a choice. That's called force. That's called coercion. And in terms of taxation, it's called extortion. And the quicker that we can come to that realization and face economic reality, the faster we can seek alternatives and seek to improve the world around us. So what do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I obviously would have to agree that it is a form of theft versus a contribution, for the reasons you stated. If you say these words, a lot of people will automatically get defensive. They believe that we're being either delusional at best, hyperbolic at worst, or sorry, the other way around. It's a matter of, obviously, as you said, being coerced into paying it. Even the people that will say they happily pay their taxes, so they're not coerced in any way. If you took away the laws enforcing that, how many people would actually continue to pay when there isn't that force that they're ignoring at the time, but they have to know it's there, especially because they're the same ones that will throw that in your face and say, well, you have to, it's the law. That obviously goes back to our previous discussion on the belief in authority. And that's why, for me, I like to ask questions like, well, how do they get that authority in the first place? Why is that the law? Why do we have to pay these taxes, especially because most people, even the most hardcore statists will admit that there's portions of the government that they don't approve of and they wish were gone, whichever side of the aisle they fall on, whatever their pet project is. There's certain things that even they can't deny, they would like to see out of the picture and not have money spent on. But they will chalk that up to it being, taking the good with the bad type thing. But with the taxation situation, if they weren't forced to do so, how likely would you be to pay for these small sections? And then what do you do if the government says, well, you're not really forced, but you still have to pay all or nothing? And they'll still be stuck in the same dilemma. Now, what do you do? Like, is it really voluntary? Are you really contributing, or are you being stolen from? I like to use the example of a small neighborhood. If, say you say, forget about government, and it's just all that exists at the present moment is just your little neighborhood, 10 houses. And everybody gets together and says, we want to do these. We want to do these things. We need to improve the streets. We need to, get a food delivery service in here. Whatever it is, and everybody agrees. Yeah, it sounds like a great idea, and they all pay in. They're all willing to chip in a little bit. But what happens when you disagree? Is it okay to force your neighbor? And most people will say no. They should understand that I don't want this, and there's no force. So why should I have to pay for it? It's like, well, if it's not okay on that small scale, why is it okay when it's on a bigger scale? Why is it all of a sudden? How do if you don't have that authority, if you can't force your neighbor, or your neighbor can't force you into paying for services that you don't want to, where does government get this authority? And the authority comes from this, here in the United States, it comes from this magical document that supposedly grants certain authorities. Well, who produced that document? It was a small group of men, and they wrote in there that Congress has the power to lay taxes. Well, who gave them that power? Most people will automatically shut down and don't even want to discuss that, because they get into circular reasoning where it's the law, or that's the way it is, and it was decided, and there was consent, and you have consent by staying here. But they'll do anything to stay away from comparing it to your neighbor trying to take this from you for the quote unquote greater good. Somebody, even if they say it's voluntary, it's not, because there is always that threat of, if you don't pay, you'll start getting phone calls from the IRS. If you ignore the phone calls, eventually somebody will show up at your house. Most likely, these days, somebody with a gun will eventually be showing up at your house in shorter order than it used to be. Because the IRS actually has its own SWAT team now, so they'll show up eventually, and just like with any other law, the eventual logical conclusion to standing up and disobeying the law because you believe it to be morally wrong, the eventual conclusion is always the ultimate is your demise. If you continue to if they come with guns and you resist, well, then they have the right to do whatever is necessary according to the law to stop you, and most times that ends up in the person's death. But there's so much violence involved in taxation, but to most people, they don't want to. You just say theft and they block it out because they only picture a mugger with a gun directly in their face. That's what they think of as theft. Anything else they don't want to listen to. But even if you describe these scenarios and point out that why is it different when one does it and then the other, it's hard to argue against the taxation as theft / extortion. But most people just don't want to have that conversation because they assume you're trying to be purposely inflammatory.
Yeah, they think you're trying
being rebellious. That's it.
You don't want to pay your fair share. That's what it is.
That's it.
You just hate authority. No. I have recently. I've recently started taking the argument away from the whole theft thing, because if you do consent to being taxed, so be it. It's not theft. I mean, let me ask you a quick question, Danilo. Can you consent to rape? No, because then it doesn't become rape anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So when you do not consent to being raped, you're getting raped. Just like if you do not consent to being taxed, you're getting stolen from. And you cannot give consent on someone else's behalf. Mm-hmm. So either you're wanting the government to force your neighbors to pay up, and by neighbors I mean your fellow man, or you believe in implied consent, which is an imaginary idea. Like, I can't come over and have sex with your wife and say, "Oh, it's just okay, it's for the better part of society." I implied consent for her, so there was no raping here. She agreed to this wholly by being on my property one day. So, it when you make the argument about consent, it's a lot easier to make it clear to people our stance. I do not consent to these things, so therefore they are immoral. If to quote Spooner, if taxation isn't theft, then a gang of thieves just needs to call themselves government for it to be legitimate. And, it goes, you want to look at taxation like this. Would people pay taxes if there was no one to enforce it? There would be a large majority that would pay, right? But you have to realize, to be a little current, Ted Cruz, he's running on abolishing the IRS, right? So he doesn't realize that the IRS, the tax revenue service of any country, I will not keep this America-centric, the tax revenue collection of any country exists to keep the military afloat. The military exists to make sure that the tax revenue collection is done. Without both of them, they can't exist. They're a symbiotic relationship. So if you abolish the IRS and move to a flat tax, who's going to enforce that? The new IRS. The tax agency that makes sure you're paying your flat tax. So you're trading one gun for another. It's like, would you rather be shot in the face with a shotgun or a rifle? So people don't realize that there's these anti-war liberals that go, we should just get rid of our military. Okay, well then, who's going to enforce the tax laws that you want to? You want all these taxes to be redistributed for your communist means. Didn't think about that. And then, the conservatives, we should abolish the IRS and, get the government tax revenue collectors out of our lives. Well, don't you want a big bad army to protect this geographical location and put 900 bases across the world and be a global empire? Yeah, I didn't think about that. How are we going to fund that? So this, isn't really thought of by people. They never think of taxation. They just think of it as, death and taxes, they'll always exist. Yeah, death and taxation will exist forever as long as men are willing to subjugate their neighbors. As long as man is willing to rob from their neighbors and take from them without consent. And my whole argument, the only way I'll talk about it, I'll say taxation is theft here and now, but I'll say taxation is theft without consent. It is charging without consent. When you go to Walmart or wherever you swipe your card, do you agree to pay this much? You have to press yes or no. The government is basically saying, swipe your card for me. And they're going to press yes or no. So there's no consent in the matter.
Well, I think the government does shopping for you and swipes your card and then slaps you with the bill, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
I got taxed pretty much like 44% of my income this year. That's pretty terrible. So
you work, yeah. That's the other thing is, the extent that we're taxed, the percentage that we're taxed is the percentage that we're enslaved and that we work for free against our will, right? To support whatever government wants to fund, which is usually, foreign wars, occupations, drone strikes, welfare, bailout, subsidies, all this crap that does not improve anyone's life except special interest groups and the corporate fascistic machine. But I like Jeremy was talking about legal plunder, which I like to look at it like that, because when you simplify it down into a very rudimentary situation, it helps people to understand. However, some people tell me when I do that, like I say, can I force my neighbor to fund my child's education. No. So then why is property tax legitimate, to fund public schools? And they say, well, you're simplifying, you're oversimplifying, you're overgeneralizing. But they always say, you don't understand it. Well, and then that kind of tells me, they're like, leave it up to the experts, leave it up to the economists, leave it up to the politicians. They know how to run things. Just sit back and relax, watch your TV.
I think too many Americans are too afraid to admit that maybe they've adopted too many principles of communism without realizing it. And I think that they're so afraid to admit that, and they'd rather just bury their head in the sand and say, this is just how it's got to be, than just man up, look in there and say, I've been supporting communism my whole life, something that my grandfather probably died for, or someone in my family had been fighting against their whole life, and they never think of that. If you look up the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, the American government has every plank in effect. But America's not a communist country. It's like communism for the poor people and fascism for the rich people. That's why I call it a communo-fascist state. It's a hegemony of both ideals intermixed. You have fascism for the top, for the huge corporations that get these huge no-bid tax subsidy contracts, and then for the bottom you have this wealth redistribution for the people, through housing projects, welfare, SNAP, all this other stuff, and we're going to plan capitalism at the top, and we're going to keep people at the bottom. Communism's for the middle class and lower. The upper class and higher is fascism. We're going to ensure that you stay profitable. And that's not what America was built on. There's Stefan Molyneux did a really good speech on freedom. And he said there's two types of freedom that people believe in. There's freedom from and freedom to. And too many Americans have adopted this freedom from. Too many people that have bought into the communist principles and the communist ideas have bought into this freedom from idea, freedom from mistake, freedom from debt, freedom from risk, instead of freedom to make risk, freedom to incur debt, freedom to, live freely. And it creates horrible atrocities upon mankind. And, taxation is that hammer that people want to use to hedge against that freedom from. So a lot of people, they feel good about making you pay those taxes, or are saying, I think you should pay those taxes. And they just don't, they will never see that gun is also pointed to their head. It's like 10 statists are standing in a circle, all with a gun to each other's head saying, pay your taxes. And they don't see the gun behind their head. So it's the government has done a very good job of tricking, or governments have done a very good job of tricking people to believe that they're also not hanging themselves with the same noose that they're hanging their neighbors with.
Well, yeah, but they also don't see that they're hanging, or they don't. Not only do they not see the gun to the back of their head, they don't see the gun in their hand, because they want to ignore that. But that, you were saying how the governments, do a good job of making them believe that. Well, yeah, that's where the horizontal enforcement comes in, where government in almost every scenario, the government does not have enough manpower to overpower its citizens. They rule based on fear of repercussions for violating some arbitrary edict. And, because if everybody just stood up and said no, they would lose all their power. They may try to go down fighting, but they'll be horribly outnumbered. So, government, all they have to do is get enough people to believe and people will be pointing that gun at their neighbor without realizing it by saying those words, and they believe they're doing right. They believe, they are on the moral path because they care about everybody, which is also why they're able to ignore communism. How you were talking about that. They pretty much all 10 planks have started and been implemented. They're not fully, in effect, but that's been going on for a long time. But they don't, like you said too, the taxation powers at all, because without that, the government loses its power. And if back to the earlier conversation, if they made it voluntary, yeah, only certain things would be funded, and you'd still have problems because certain people would want some things and certain people wouldn't want other things, and they wouldn't know how to handle it. And in the government structure, and you just end up right back where you started again, doing it that way. People need to understand where this all starts with the authority, and they need to make those connections where they can see that they actually do have a gun in their hand. Nobody wants to think that. Nobody wants to think themselves as a violent individual. But it's tough, when
you can subcontract violence, essentially, wash your hands of it, you see it, but you're blocking it with your hand. That doesn't mean it's not still happening. Hear
no evil, see no evil.
Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance at its finest.
Yeah, I would contest one thing that you said, Jeremy. You said taxation. It's like the foundation that powers the machine. I think taxation and the belief in authority go hand in hand, right? But I think that the belief in authority is even more powerful of a force to subjugate the people, because really, without the belief in authority, without the belief that the ruling class has legitimacy, it would not be viewed as the ruling class. It would not be viewed as an authority. It would just be viewed as a mafia, right? The biggest mafia in the land, and their
which it
threats.
Is.
Say again.
Yeah, which it is.
Which it is. Yeah, their threats of punishment and violence would not be viewed as laws. They would be viewed as threats of violence, right? Their threats of extortion would be viewed as that, and rather than taxation. There's all these political euphemisms that are always trying to honeycoat the the underlying ugly underbelly of the political machine that nobody really wants to see, because that is ugly, right? That is not pleasant. That's not, and maybe that's the cause of why most people say they say two topics not to be discussed at the dinner table, right? Politics and religion. But I would say say again.
No, I was just going to say also, and I think it's not even the dinner table. I think the original phrase was just in polite company.
In polite company, yeah, exactly. And so, and the other thing I wanted to say was, some people say, well, taxes are good because we get something out of it, right? We get roads, we get the post office, we get, welfare, SNAP, we get all these supposed quote unquote benefits. And what that is telling me is that, first of all, this person has a complete lack of creativity and imagination, and they believe that violence is necessary to bring about certain things. Like, we need to point guns at people, or else roads would not be built, right? Or else, we would not help the needy or the sick or the elderly or the poor without violence in society. We need the violence, which is very, psychopathic way to view reality, And again, when people use politics in terms of voting and supporting their elected representatives, they don't see it as violence, right? They just see it as a big community, and you're supporting your representative, but it is violence, because that's what gives it power, is the belief in authority and the violence. That's why people feel the need to go along with it, but it's very interesting, those relationship between taxation and the belief in authority. They're so intermingled, and that's where the power of public education, indoctrination, and propaganda and revisionist history, teaching the kids about skewed history in favor of, you know, whatever nation they're being taught in. You know, if they're being taught in Germany, they're gonna learn skewed German history, right? It's whatever it is. So, what do you
I mean,
think?
yeah, there's a reason why they don't teach, you know, paying taxes in government mandated schools. I mean, they want you to be a complete idiot. They want you to keep having to go to other people to pay, you know, to figure out these taxes and stuff. And I think, you know, the more they can keep people in the dark on the whole thing. I mean, what is there? There's 75,000 pages to the United States tax code, 12 font on regular size paper. So, I mean, that's, you know, that's, I mean, so, I mean, I've got a picture of me holding up the Affordable Health Care Act, and it was this big of 12 font paper. So, and that was only 22,000 or 2,000 pages. So 75,000, I can't imagine. Like, that's unrealistically ridiculous. You know, and it's government right now is, a lot of people think your income tax, for instance, there's this myth, you know, it pays for stuff that it doesn't. The entirety of the entirety of the United States population that pays income tax, the moment the government gets that, it's gone. It goes to pay the debt from last year. It goes not to the budget, doesn't go to any bank or anything. It's not like they're sitting on a pile of money. It just goes to pay the debt, or the interest, really, on their debt. So
On a fictional debt.
on the fictional debt, yeah, to the Federal Reserve, you know. What was it the other day? You know, the China owns like $1 trillion of American debt, but the Fed owns like 9. And the rest of their debt is unfunded liabilities to, you know, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and, you know, all of our military expansionism. You know, like, think of this, you know, like, if taxes are good, right? If you enjoy paying taxes, could you imagine if before America went to war with Afghanistan or Iraq, let's just say Iraq, before the government said we're going to invade Iraq, they went to everyone's house and said, hey, we're going to need you to sign this contract to pay $75,000, because that's it. Right now, that's where we're at with each American, even the most broke poor person and the rich person. They're $75,000 in debt just for the Iraqi war. Do you think America would have went to war if everyone would have had to sign a contract to fund that?
But war stimulates the economy, though, right?
No. That's war is the health of the state, because under the precursor of war, the state can do whatever it wants. So, you know, like I've often pondered, like if like let's say just some force outside of America came in and started like broadcast a message and said, we're only going to attempt to shut down your government. What would people do? Like, we're not going to kill innocent civilians. We're not going to do this or that. We're just going to shut down your government. What do you think people would do? Would people say, no, we have to rally behind these politicians, the ones that are freaking us over so bad? You know, they're robbing us blind. You know, the war on terror has now cost every American around $125,000 in debt. Like, and you pay that in taxes for them to borrow more money from the Fed, to fund more wars, to fund more welfare. To what end, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that the Fed wants a global currency by collapsing all the economies. But I think the more people realize that taxation is a scourge upon mankind and won't have it anymore, they'll stand up for their brother. They'll say, no, I'm not going to allow this entity to rob us blind. And they just will not comply with it. Well, to pay an army, to pay for enforcement, you have to have money. If the government collects no money, then it can't pay those people. You know, even though I read the other day that there was a senator that came out that said we don't even need another tax dollar from any American. At this point, we can just print up all the money we need. So if that's the truth, then why are we paying our taxes? What's the point in it? If they can just print up all the money they need to run the government, then what's the point? It's all about control.
Well, yeah, because I was going to say the point is perpetuating itself. That's the only point there is. People don't see that all these horrible things that they're forcing others to do, and you know, as what you were saying about the debt and everything. I mean, yes, we know it to be pretty much imaginary at this point, you know, because the money is worthless. But to the average person, they believe that the dollar still has some real value to it, so they will cherish it to an extent, but then willingly give it over to government, you know, as you were saying too, Danilo, about how, you know, it just more and more of it goes to these things, and people don't even take it into consideration because they have to, you know, they take that good with the bad. They see the good things and say, oh, well, government has to do this, so we need to give them our money. But it's not, as you know, back to what you were saying, Dave, about the, you know, that it doesn't actually pay for anything. Well, at this point, of course not. I mean, just according to what the government puts out, you know, their own numbers, it's what, 18 trillion now, is what they claim the official debt is, and they don't take into consideration the unfunded liabilities, which the numbers on that I've seen range anywhere from 90 trillion to 120 trillion. I
think the last time I heard
200. I've seen numbers anywhere in that range from
I think the official government recognized number is 68 trillion, which is double the world's GDP for a year.
I didn't even think they were recognizing it, but that
I think that's their like the CBO's number.
Oh, yeah. Well, that makes sense. So still completely undershooting what even the most conservative estimate by anybody else was. You know, so there's obviously no way with the amount of taxes they collect that they could put anywhere near a dent in that, you know, and that's, I mean, part of the problem is they're not supposed to, because it can't. It's a debt-based system, you know, with the fiat money that they use. So if the only way to remove the debt is to remove all the money in existence, they have to, you know, keep dropping currency until,
or if everyone just gives up on the currency.
Well, or if it collapses, you know, and that ties into something else you were saying about if everybody just stopped paying, you know, I that was one of the tweets I put out on tax day, you know, if 10 million just decided not to pay 1 year, what would happen? There's no way
the money they missed.
Well, no, but I mean, what would happen to those people? Not many of them would see anything happen because they can't possibly prosecute us all.
Well, I read something the other day, or heard something the other day somewhere, that 80% of all IRS employees are over 50, and everyone they try to get in that is under that, they just won't take the job. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what they're going to do to convince people to take that job, but they're going to have a real crisis pretty soon with people retiring.
I don't know. I mean, it may be in the short term, but all they'll do is come up with some great perk package.
I think that's... Yeah, no, I get that, but what I'm saying is it just speaks wonders to our generation that they don't want to be part of that evil.
It's a job for your golden years. What are you talking about?
Well, yeah. They may have had a requirement at one point.
Most of these IRS employees are employees for life. Like, they've been employees for 30, 40 years.
Okay.
So it's a shocking thing that I heard. I was like, wonder what bull crap story the government's going to have to crop up to get actual IRS employees.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're not going to have to. They're not footing the bill, so they'll improve the perk packages until people are willing to take the job again. You know, that's not really a problem. There's always going to be people that are quite willing to run to government for a job. You just have to put the right package together. And when you have unlimited funds, and they're not yours to begin with, you can, you know, offer whatever you want, because other people will be footing the bill generations ahead if the system isn't stopped. You know, what I was trying to starting to say before, rather, about, you know, people just not paying, you know, that's all it would take is that many people just to stop. And they would have a hard time even coming close to prosecuting like a quarter of those people. But that ties back into the belief in authority. That's the only reason it's there. If people just said, well, you know what, I don't agree with some of these things you're doing, so no, I don't think I should have to pay for them. They would have to scramble even harder to find a way to, would they start printing money? Yeah, they probably would, but that's just going to cause hyperinflation is always just around the corner. No matter how many times the Keynesians want to say that it's just doomsday talk by the Austrians, it's the threat of it is always there because they have complete control of the money. Whether people want to believe that the Federal Reserve is a completely private entity or not, it's absolutely not. There's no way it can be, because they work hand in hand with the government. So all it takes is for them to start printing to the point where everything loses value and you have the Weimar Republic all over again. You should be able to convince conservatives on this. You should be able to sell the fiscally conservative liberals on this, just, without even getting to the theft argument. If there's things you don't agree with, you shouldn't have to pay for them. It shouldn't work that way, Just don't pay for a year. See what happens, And one of two things, the most likely thing that will occur is everything will continue as normal for a while, and maybe then they'll see, hey, wait a minute, there was no contributions and everything's still going right along. Maybe they'll start looking deeper into the money system at that point. It's just, it's that the hardcore ones are you're almost never going to reach, that believe that it's, it is your civic duty and we have to pay these things and there's no way it could be theft, but there's so many other people out there that disagree with one aspect or another. And, you mentioned Ted Cruz before, that's just a joke. Any politician who claims you're going to shut the IRS, they're never going to, because they can't, as you said, it's tied to everything. And that also touches on what you said earlier, Danilo. I actually believe that as you said, that the belief in authority is the overpowering force. When I said the taxation powers the machine, I meant the actual physical machines. That's how they get their money.
So one of my favorite quotes, I forget who said it. He says, "The level of taxation in a society is the measurement of a basic civilization." So complete taxation would be totalitarianism, or complete enslavement would be the complete deterioration of civilization, and no taxation would be a free and voluntary society would be considered a success. And also, I kind of find it funny when government employees or government workers tell me, I pay my taxes.
Yeah. We can do a whole hour on why government employees don't pay taxes, and a government employee broke this down for me the other day, and it made a lot of sense, and I had never really thought about it like that. Not to steal your point here, but he said, they inflate government employees, what they get paid, and then tax them on it to make it seem normal, and then they use that other tax money for stuff that they really want to, or to give other more government jobs. So
it's like I saw a meme of those power cables where it has multiple outlets in it. You plug it into the wall. It's like this is a government employee paying taxes. Is the power cable plugged into itself? All right, it does not contribute.
It's snake
anything.
Eating its own tail.
Yeah. It's like it's completely counterproductive to society, and it means nothing. It's like you got to tell these people your salary is funded by taxation. What the hell are you talking about? You pay taxes. It's completely illogical. It's not like your job is not even considered a job because it was not created out of market demand, right? Because if it was able to be created out of market demand, the guns would not be necessary to force people to create it or to force people to pay you, because people would want to voluntarily pay you, right? I mean, teachers, in public schools, you can say that they have the ability or they have the skills that can be transferred to a voluntary society. They can teach, right? But other people like tax agents or IRS agents, what skill do they have? They're thieves. That's all. That's the only skill they know. They're con artists or what. So some people do have sort of valuable skills, but
yeah, that's what I tell police officers. Like, without government, you would have a job because people want safety. I mean, you believe you're protecting people, but then that those security agencies would pop up, and they would need people to do that. So, majority of police officers, it would just be now you're paid through voluntary means.
But I assume they would have to be deprogrammed first,
Oh yeah,
it's not shoot first and ask questions later. All right, you're not a police officer anymore.
Yeah, you will get fired if you fuck up.
Dogs are not meant to be dead. Okay, dogs are okay. Keep them alive.
So I want to ask you guys 3 questions.
You're putting Jeremy out of business. Come on.
I want to ask Jeremy and Danilo yes or no questions. 3 of them. All right. Would you consider a society that has the largest prison population in the world civilized?
No.
Those violent, non-violent drug offenders harming themselves, harming society.
Yes or no?
Of course.
Okay, all right. Would you consider a society where people who organize mass murders to the tunes of millions get salaries paid by society and are lauded over like lords and kings, a civilized society?
Dave, you're oversimplifying it. It's called war. It's not called mass murder. All right.
Okay. My bad. Go. Yes or no?
No.
No.
Would you consider a society that has flying robotic machines that blow people up and their property at a 10% success rate on the desired target, 80% casualty rate, a civilized society?
No.
Of course. Isn't that so sad though? Drones are not inherently machines, evil machines. Like they can do beautiful things, like deliver packages, deliver food. Instead, they're
no. I know these things.
I'm just saying, maybe we should go into that. That's a fascinating topic because.
So my last question, this tacked on question, because you all answered correctly. Then are taxes what we pay for a civilized society?
Exactly.
No.
Yeah. Well said.
Well, no, I say that all the time. Most people will say.
I just wanted to completely shit all over that statement.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing. People say taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. No, it's the opposite. It's the reason. You're convinced you need to pay them because it's not civilized. There's violence all around you, whether you want to recognize it or not. There's always a gun being pointed at somebody to get them to do what others, with the will of the others is, which is that consent issue, which people think that you gave implied consent at some point. Or they think they can apply it for others, as Dave said earlier. People don't know what that word means. People don't understand it. It's become part of political rhetoric. And
it's the consent of the governed, man. We the people.
Yeah, consent of the governed. You consented by staying here. That type of stuff. Yeah, you don't really understand what consent means. It's a violation if I don't agree with it, and to force me to leave or tell me I have to leave or stay and take it. That is not that is a false choice. That is not. That's the same thing with following the laws. You don't have a choice. No, you either. You either obey or eventually you'll die. That's not a choice. It's, you can claim it as a choice. It's a false choice. It's not a choice.
I saw something the other day, to add to your point, about consent. It was like, the difference between voluntary and taxation. And it was a guy, he was walking past and it said bakery on the window, and the guy goes, "Hey, do you want to buy a piece of bread for $1 or a loaf of bread for $1?" The guy whips out his billfold and says, "Yes, here's $1. Thank you for the bread." and then it was like taxation, and it shows the guy walking by, the baker's behind him, and he grabs him around the neck. He's like, "Here's your loaf of bread," while he's pulling your wallet out of the back of your pocket.
To make the analogy more accurate, it should be a stale, old, hard loaf of bread, and then he steals the wallet and, and gives him back a couple of pennies. That's it.
So the point is just because you get shit that you could use, or you get stuff back that you deem useful or anyway like necessary, doesn't mean that taxation is good. There's still, it's like the slavery. Who will pick the cotton? I don't know who's going to pick the cotton, but we know slavery's bad. I don't know who's going to build the roads, but I know slavery or taxation is bad. I don't know who's going to drone bomb Kenyans, but I know taxation is bad. All right? So we could just end it there. Let's not get into this semantical, imaginary fantasy land of what could happen if that.
In your utopian anarchist paradise, how would blank?
Yeah, it's like... Well, that big book that says, what will happen if...
What will happen? No, I was going to say that's a great analogy, who will pick the cotton. I talk about that a lot. I tell people that, we were talking about, how voluntarists are also abolitionists, because of the modern day abolitionists. And that the abolitionists of the 19th century did not oppose slavery because they were fortune tellers or oracles or could foresee the rise of industrial machines picking, and tilling the soil, picking the, the crops. They did it on moral grounds alone. That was enough. Like, it's just immoral to own other human beings. You don't need to be a fortune teller to be against that.
Yeah, and just because I only work for the government 45% of the year, even if it's 1% of the year, does not mean that I'm not 1%. Like, at what percentage of me being robbed does it not constitute slavery?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And, and that's I tell people a lot of times, and they get mad, huffy puffy, and I don't think they realize the definitions that, like you were saying at the beginning of this episode, Danilo, the definitions are clear, but I truly believe that taxation is slavery. Some people call it theft. Slavery is theft. Yeah, you're not shackled to a chain, and you're not sleeping in some mud hut or whatever that you had to build, and yeah, you get to go watch your movies on Friday, or you get to go drink beers with your friends and stuff, but half your life, half your year goes to paying for the people who are bombing other countries and giving the money to companies that don't deserve it, and helping keep lies afloat and boondoggles afloat. And this is all anti-human. You know what I'm saying, Jeremy?
Yeah. People, they accept these things, and they don't want to see that all these bad things are happening because of them. They just want to try to reform it from the inside and hope some of the bad things go away. But they're always, the cycle will continue. Like you said, if they keep paying it, if they keep paying in, it's just going to keep happening. You can't stop that. And people, even if they don't want to think of the robbery argument, most people don't even realize how much is taken out, between all levels of taxation. It is, the average person does pay 50%. And, that can be considered a form of slavery, because half of your time and effort has been taken from you, whether you agree with it or not. And if it's slavery because it's against your consent, well, if you consent, that's on you. It's still slavery for everybody else who doesn't consent.
It's like that lemonade, that Crystal Light, slavery light.
Yeah, people don't want to use. People don't like when we use the analogy, because they automatically have their mind go back to chain slavery, which was obviously horrific. And hopefully the world will never see that on that type of scale again, ever. But it's, again, that goes back to what I said earlier about people, even the theft argument. People think they think we're being hyperbolic by saying these things and just trying to get a response out of them, or trying to demonize what they believe to be good. But it's not, like you said, Danilo, you started off with the definitions and stuff. To me, I always equate it to, it's newspeak. That's what it is. Newspeak is alive and well. All government has done is taken words, and given new meanings, and the euphemisms are supposed to be something completely different, because when you do break it down to the small level, like I said earlier, with the little neighborhood example, if it would be theft for you to take from your neighbor, who didn't want to be part of your little system, then it's theft for anybody else. So they are, they're stealing from you, whether you want to believe it or not. It's really hard to debate that. But people, they don't want to see it because they believe in the newspeak. So, taxation becomes theft. Dave, you said mass murder becomes war. The line from 1984, of course, was war is peace. Which is funny because most people who will, even statists who read that, can understand it on some level, how ridiculous that sounds. But when somebody like Ronald Reagan, or now I'm sure Ted Cruz will pick it up too, because I think he seems to be modeling himself after Reagan. Peace through strength, same exact thing, reversed order. But they don't want to see that because they've been blinded by the rhetoric. The same thing with conscription. Conscription was essentially slavery. You were forced to be a part of the military, whether you like to or not. When the draft happened, that was a form of slavery. Most people did it willingly, because they thought they were doing right for their country. But it's there.
Yeah, it's hard when conscription was in place. Like if you dodged the draft or spoke out publicly, no one was going to give you a job. No one's like, you were basically kicked out of society, and that's that pack mentality.
Well, that's that blind nationalism where people don't think about, if you're breaking the law or you're not willing to stand up for your country, even though nobody's been fighting for our country for a very long time. they're fighting for the politicians and the bankers, and they haven't
not since the Revolutionary War have we fought for this country.
Well, I guess, technically the War of 1812, we sort of did. Not we. The government at that time sort of did.
Davy Crockett?
There can be there also could be a case made for the War of Northern Aggression that we spoke about with Jim Limber Davis last week. That that was actually the last fight for American freedom, because the Southerners were literally just trying to walk away, so they were fighting for their freedom.
Well, they were trying to exert. They were trying to exert the intention of the Constitution, which is if a government becomes too tyrannical, you can pull away. A lot of people think that war is about slavery, which is not. Which we could do a whole episode on the Civil War, but I wanted to move on to something that is that is really confused in a lot of statist heads, and I want Danilo to see what he has to say about this. But it's just two words. It's corporate taxes.
Corporate taxes. Well, given the fact that corporations are themselves a machination of the state, people I think are vilifying corporations alone. They see Monsanto producing GMOs and buying up all seeds, and then you see Chevron polluting Amazon rainforests and destroying indigenous villages, and so it's kind of how you say, acceptable to go after the corporations, and we are the 99%, right, the occupiers. So it's but people have to understand what the root cause is, and what gives these corporations power. And although the corporations are they're still more or less how you say, funded by the people, because we're not forced to buy GMOs, right? We're not forced to buy their products, but nevertheless, their power and their sovereign immunity is obtained through legislation, right? Through many many bills that are passed that are basically written by them and then regulated by them. So
Well,
yeah, so taxing the corporation would achieve absolutely nothing. But actually, I wanted to make one point. That's kind of interesting in the taxation argument is, let's say you're talking to somebody and you break the legs of all these arguments, and then they come back with the appeal to pity logical fallacy. They say, well, what about the person who just down in their luck, they can't find a job? Don't you think it's your duty to support them? Don't you think you just have a moral obligation to help your fellow man?
Was I involved in the procreation of this said individual?
Yeah. So attempting to use emotion to sway you, and basically calling most voluntarists, basically, you're just selfish. You just think about yourself. You don't think about society. What's good for the greater good. Which I'd like to point out every time people say that. That was the same argument used by Hitler. People don't like to realize that
The greater good of Germany. Yeah,
it was for the greater good.
he said the whole world will be in peace when Germany is the only country.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the whole newspeak thing, where these terms have been used over and over and over again. They change them, they update them with the times to whatever the common parlance is at the wherever they are. They will craft the words, but they all have the same meaning. But people don't see it because they are to hit on the school discussion, they're indoctrinated to think that certain people are bad, our country's good. Dave, I think you said it earlier in the show that they the other countries learn the same thing, that about their country. They're taught that they're good and everybody else is bad.
Yeah, it's the same argument I use against religions. Like, how can your God be good and theirs be bad when they believe the same thing?
Yeah,
our God is good and your God is bad. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's all rhetoric and smoke and mirrors, and people are easily mystified by that. It's funny that people who think government are necessary because people are bad still don't want to think ill of their fellow man as it comes to like politicians and stuff, because they don't want to think they have these bad intentions. They want to think that they wouldn't lie to them, and they are. We are exceptional. We are different. We are better, and every country, all the citizens of every country think that. I hate that line. It's so ridiculous. Like, why? I ask people straight out, why are we exceptional?
Sean Hannity, man, you gotta go listen. You gotta go listen to the Seanster, man. He knows it.
Why are you exceptional? And they can never really answer that without some horrible mental gymnastics to try to get.
Well, because America's the home of the free and the land of the brave, man, and we're the greatest nation on earth, and you just need to show a little respect, man. Hoorah!
Yeah.
We had Chris Kyle, damn it. He killed 300-something people for your freedoms.
God damn it.
No, but my point about corporate taxes that you completely missed is corporations do not pay taxes. All taxes on corporations is passed on to the consumer. Every tax, like if I sell vaporizers at my store, let's say I make these and I sell them for $100, right? And the government goes, hey, we need to put a 10% tax on there. I'm not eating 10% in profit. This thing's going to be $110 now. I'm not paying 1 red cent in taxes. So everything that the government does to try to control corporations is a farce. It's so they can get more money. The government can get more money through those voluntary interactions that the corporations get. Somewhat voluntary. Some of them receive huge amounts of subsidies that keep them in business. We shut out competition. It's a cycle. It's like, okay, so the huge corporations get taxed their face off, and the smaller corporations can't pay it. And then the bigger corporations get subsidies from the government to help pay for those taxes. So they put everyone out of business and create that fascistic model for these people to ensure profits, if you listen to some of Tom Wood's stuff about the about the railroads and all these huge factory makers, that wanted to eliminate or price control, like all the cartels that were made for certain industries, about how they wanted to use government force to shut down corporations that wouldn't apply to the cartel's rules. And that's just another form of fascism. Like if you're not, fascism, when I say that, I mean government interjection in the marketplace, even if it's just a little, even if it's just one thing, so the government, the Constitution, people get mad at me when I call the Constitution a fascist document. Well, for instance, in the Constitution, in I believe it's Article 1, Section 8, says that they can keep and maintain a well-regulated navy, I think, or something. That is creating an artificial demand in the marketplace of aqua defense or coastal defense. So you're already creating a fascist facet of the economy through a monopoly on the Navy, on who can protect what state. And so a lot of people don't look at things like that. But, corporations do not pay taxes. They either get taxed so high that they have to make their prices so high that either the government has to give them a subsidy or they go out of business. Or they just raise their prices to pay that tax. So their profits never change. You look at the gas tax. Exxon and Chevron and all these other big gasoline companies make record profit year after year after year after year, and the taxes on them keep going up year after year after year. How does that happen then? That just proves exactly what I said to be true. 100% to be true. So you were saying something to the accord of how they use taxes to control society a little bit.
Yeah, people tend to think that, if there's a problem in society, just tax the rich, right? That's the common theme. And that's kind of, it's pretty, as you were saying, communist in nature. It's like we cannot be unequal in freedom, right? We must be equal in slavery. Of course, the rulers, except the rulers, but everyone else equal in slavery, which is really quite sad, because people expect, they think that like everybody, contributes the same, so nobody should have more, right? Like so what if in your communist, this forced fascistic communist society, if somebody works hard, then someone who didn't work at all is entitled to the fruits of their labor, right? Which is pretty sick and perverted, and contrary to reality. Like what is the incentive for somebody to work hard if they know that their profits and their products will be confiscated at a whim by people who are just parasites on society?
Yeah.
What do you think? Jeremy?
Yeah, they think they want to pass it off on others. That's the theme. It's always somebody else will do it, and we should do it, and we and you should take from the more the more wealthy among us. But as Dave was saying with the corporate taxes, that is the point. They don't have to pay, so you can tax them all you want, and it doesn't hurt them. And even the ones that it might hurt, they get the favorable regulations and the tax loopholes, because that's you started to say that too, Dave. That's how the scheme works. All the regulations, even just the tax regulations, they're always set at the level that it's just enough for the preferred corporations to bear it in one form or another, whether it's passing it off a little at the time to their customers or paying what they need to because they're going to get subsidies down the road. It's just enough for them to tolerate it, but it's just too much for the smaller companies to even think of contending, and they eventually fold. And that's how how we get to Dave's favorite word, fascism, where they
I'm just trying to drill it into people's heads so they realize exactly what They don't realize that that's what's going on.
I actually wasn't picking on you that time, Dave.
I know you're
serious.
not picking on me. I'm just trying to explain myself a little bit.
I normally am. That time I wasn't.
Normally, yeah.
But that's how they get to that point. But the thing is, we started to touch on it a little earlier, and I think one of the bigger problems surrounding taxation is, obviously the belief in authority, because without that it goes away. But the problem is people can't think beyond what they have now. And we started to touch on this a little bit, all of us did, how people, the average person can't even begin to conceive how these things would be, whatever services they particularly care for. Like, they can't possibly fathom how they would be produced without government taxing people, without people, like we said, they don't see. I'll give you an example
real quick. Google Fiber just announced that they were going to an area, and in that area, Time Warner upped their service capabilities 8 times the amount that they were previously giving, just from them announcing that they might bring Google Fiber into the area. So that just goes to show you what competition in a soft monopolized industry could do.
Well, yeah, and people, we've touched on the monopolies before in other episodes, and it's true. People don't, their reasoning usually for wanting the government to control these things, the government to provide these things, which of course is a joke because the government doesn't actually provide anything. When you steal the means first and then hand those means over to subcontractors to do the work, you're not actually doing anything. You're just the most expensive and most of the time incompetent middleman the world has ever known. But people don't want to think about how it could be done. They think government has to because they're afraid of the monopoly, the horrible monopolies popping up. That's what'll happen if you privatize everything, somebody will take the market. Completely missing the point that that's what you have now when you have the government dealing with these specific things, whether it be national defense, whether it be the money, whatever it is, now healthcare, whatever government controls, even mostly, it's a monopoly. but people are afraid of monopolies. And, you started to touch on competition, and that's the thing. People will see competition in any other avenue and think it's a good thing. I'm sure the people in that area with Google's announcement are excited that they're now getting better service just because of an announcement, because there's competition. I think Dave, you've used the ice cream shop analogy before, where it's, how many ice cream shops do you have in your town, and isn't it better to have more? If you only have one and it sucks, well, then you're out of luck. And that's the problem. People, they think we need government for all these things. They think we need to be taxed.
Anybody listening to this, I have an open challenge. If you can point to me one monopoly that exists or has existed in the history of man without government intervention in any way, I will send you a T-shirt when we finally get them for free. I will mail you. I will buy one for you.
Dave's first challenge.
It's an open challenge. And I'm not talking about a small market where, like, out in some. I'm talking about a huge monopoly, Standard Oil type. And if you say Standard Oil was created without government force, you really need to go back and read some things.
No, that's the problem. That's the problem, is that people will refer back to their government history from that they received in government school, and they're going to say, "Well, chain slavery was from private people." Look at what happened with Rockefeller and Standard Oil.
Most slave
and
laws were enforced by government.
Exactly, but people don't realize that, because that's what they received from their government schooling. So,
like, you actually had to register your slaves with the state. Like, a lot of people don't realize that. It wasn't just like
the bounty hunters.
The state, yeah, it wasn't like the state was like, "Hey, they got slaves over there on that plantation. We don't really know or care about it." No, the government was just as oppressive then. They were like, "How many slaves you got? What's their names? How many you got? What, if one of them has a baby, we want to know about it." It's like,
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no. Sorry, I cut you off there, Jeremy. But you're going on about monopolies, and I just love
going on and on.
No. You were going on about monopolies, and I just love to tell people that monopolies cannot exist without some facet of government getting involved. I mean, just Standard Oil, for example. So just in case anybody goes and says Standard Oil, Standard Oil not only used copyright and IP laws that are enforced by government, they also used regulations and zoning laws enforced by their local and state and federal governments. They also used the government to enforce no competition in their areas. So there's no way they achieved that monopoly status without the violence of government. But also, everyone thinks that their monopoly was evil, but the price of kerosene, which was their major product, did this the whole time they were a monopoly. Down. So it was just government trying to assert itself into the market. I mean, companies are going to go and they're going to come and they're going to die and they're going to succeed and they're going to... So you broke up Standard Oil with government. You let Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, have 30% of each company that they broke it into, and then he became richer. Yay, you broke up his monopoly. Woo! You just created three more tax cows.
You know, talking about competition, it's funny when people they tell me, well, if you just let the market go free, what you're eventually going to happen is have one business that's going to swell to gigantic proportions, and by undercutting everyone else, charging rock bottom prices, and you know who can resist that? And then once they have control, they're going to hike up the prices and shaft everyone else. And so basically they're saying there's three different types of ways that you can deceive the customer, right, through pricing. You can either undercut them, right, charge next to nothing, which it seems to be a benefit, but I don't know, in some people's twisted socialist world, that's an evil. And then in the second one is like collusion, which is like equal to everyone, where companies collude. Okay, everything is equal. And then you have price gouging, which is jacking it up, usually in emergency situations. But it seems to me they're all crimes. But I'm like, wait a minute, that's just the price mechanism adapting to various situations. Like, since when did that become a crime? So competition, it seems, in many people's minds, is a crime. Yeah. Which is very strange. Like
that horrible idea of the government or a monopoly becoming and then taking over one thing and then undercutting everybody so they put them out of business and then they jack the prices way up has never happened in the entirety of humanity.
And the other thing is, like, are you saying you want higher prices? Is that what you're telling me? Like, you don't want low price? Like, when you go to the store, do you say, okay, which one is the most expensive and least efficient product here? Let me buy that one. Like, what are you saying? You know, people don't know what they're saying. It's and talking about the the ice cream shop and everything. It's like people want variety in their cell phones, in their laptops, in their cars, in ice cream, right? They want variety because that's what they know, right? But they don't want variety in courts or police, or defense agencies, or currencies, alternative currencies, because they don't know that, because they've never experienced it. So that would be the appeal to antiquity, right? It has always been that way, and it must always be this way. They can't imagine a world different than that, and that genuinely frightens many people. And that's, and going back to what Jeremy was saying, statism is rooted in fear of the unknown, fear of what your neighbor might do to you, fear of pre-crime or thought crime or what might happen. So we have to enslave each other in the present day with all these 75,000 tax code, page tax code, and immense laws and regulations. So all right. So why don't we give our final remarks, Jeremy? What do you want to say to people about taxation? If somebody came up to you.
Well, like I said earlier, try to think of it in different terms. Try to think about if it's if your neighbor was doing the same exact thing, would you think it's okay? If it is, well, then you have no problem. And if that is the case, then if you don't mind, give me your address and I'll be by to pick up
exactly.
A portion of your stuff, because you don't seem to have a problem with that. And most people will automatically balk at that and say, no, well, no, of course not. Well, no, if we're gonna apply logic consistently and we use the logic the logical path you were trying to go down, then that's the same thing. If you don't have a problem with it,
please refer to the Larkin Rose "I have the right to rob you" video.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one for this. You know, but if you don't believe that your neighbor has that right or you have that right, then where does government get that right? You know, try to ask yourself where does that right come from? Just because it's written down on a piece of paper, you know? No. Well, if you don't have a right to do something, then you can't give that right to somebody else, which means the people, you know, the founders who are always deified by the average statist will, you know, they made a decision for everybody and they never actually got consent. So, you know, they wrote it down on a piece of paper. Congress has the authority to tax. Where did they get that authority? If you didn't have that if you don't have that right or authority, and they didn't have that right or authority as an individual, then where did they get it to put that, you know, to give it, you know, to give it to themselves so they could take this money? You know, when you think of it in those terms, it's really hard to deny that you are being robbed when you are required to pay taxes. You know, because if it was voluntary, as some people try to claim, one of my favorite videos from, like, I don't know, 8-10 years ago was Harry Reid getting caught on some you know, local. It was before podcasts. It was like a local video show or something, and the guy caught him and got him to say that, you know, taxes were voluntary, and then he got all mad.
That was Jan Helfeld.
Oh, was it Jan? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You know, he got caught. He got caught like a deer in headlights, and it's like, well, no, of course it's not. So if it's compulsory, it's not. It's the opposite of voluntary, and you don't have a choice. You either pay or you will eventually meet your demise if you follow it to its logical conclusions. That, in any other scenario, most people would consider theft. And like I said, if you wouldn't consider that theft, then we have a whole nother set of issues to talk to you about. But try to look at it from these angles and ask yourself, you know, and also the most important question for people to ask themselves is, would you pay if you didn't have that force? Would you pay for all these things? And if your first objection is, well, government has to do these things because no one else will, or, you know, you're afraid of monopolies, or, you know, whatever it is, the next question you should ask yourself is, how well is it really being done now? Whatever the service is, how efficient is it? How much, you know, go look at the numbers. How much do they, what is the budget of the individual agency that you prefer to have around? Like, you know, what are they spending? How much is being poured into that? Is it, you know, is it in any way efficient? If it's not, and I'll assure you now that you won't find a single one that's being run efficiently, why are you so afraid of something different? You know, it comes down to that, the devil you know versus the devil, you know. I said it in reverse the other day, where it's, you know, people fear the devil they've only heard about versus, you know, fearing the devil that's actually pulling the, you know, stoking the flames of that fear. You know, because you fear the unknown. You fear what would happen without these things, you know, from the military to the roads, to all this stuff. It will, any problem that needs to be taken care of, the market will handle. You know, that's how it works. That's how the process works. You know, there's a demand, it will be filled. You know, and, you know, anytime you bring up objections, question those objections a little more before you throw them out. Because if you say at any point you're afraid of monopolies, realize who's in charge of it now. The largest monopoly in the world. You know, so that's pretty much it.
Yeah. My closing statement would be, to everyone that's listening to this and still believes taxation is necessary, I want you to, since it is tax time, or just over, you're probably familiar with how much you paid. I want you to look at that large sum on your income tax, and I want you to find someone else that took that much from you this year, or in any year past, or in any year past combined. So, when's the last time a random stranger stole $20,000 from you? When's the last time Kmart stole $20,000 or $10,000 from you? When's the last time a mugger walked up and Yeah, he took your watch, but that's still a drop in the bucket when you look at your total assets compared to what the government took. So at the end of the year, you look at who stole from you the most, and you can argue, which you will, that, yeah, I get stuff from the government. I don't agree with everything they say or do, but I get stuff. But, like, if you were paying for a water company and you found out that water company, a privately owned water company, was bombing people or, pretending to be a legitimate mafia somewhere, you would pull away and you would say, I'm not buying from that company anymore. You can't do that with government. So just think of that.
Unsubscribe.
Yeah, it's like if you can't treat everything just like Netflix, where you go in there, you go, I don't like what Netflix is doing, unsubscribe. If Netflix, sent a drone to your house and blew your house up because you unsubscribed, they would go out of business tomorrow. The government essentially does the same thing, and you can't. So just think of that. Someone says that if your objection is taxation isn't violence, it is. Just try not paying your taxes. If you believe wholeheartedly that taxation is not violence, I implore you to not file your taxes next year. And then send them a message. Send them a letter to the IRS and say, I did not pay your taxes because I believe that they are not enforced with violence. I triple dog dare you.
So I'm gonna take Dave. You're talking to people who were robbed, right, on tax day, or maybe who have to pay something. I want to mention those people who actually got a refund, say the great word intoxication, right, which is just the euphoric feeling of receiving a refund on tax day until you realize it was your money to begin with, right? And that it's just the stolen money that they decided to graciously give back to you, that they will not spend on whatever nefarious reasons they were going to spend it on. But also, I wanted to point out the I don't know if you touched on this. I think Jeremy did the black and white logical fallacy, which is if government doesn't build the roads, or nobody's going to build it. If government doesn't control the currency, we wouldn't have currency, right? If government doesn't teach the kids, everyone's going to be illiterate, right? So, or the false dilemma. So, people have to realize that, and which is basically the same as saying if government doesn't subsidize, or control the growing of crops, then everyone's going to go hungry. We're not going to have food to eat, which is something that people have to come to terms with. That
there's farmers out there that want to make money.
Yeah, and people tend to attribute progress and technological advancement with government. Like they say, what are you talking about? Government's bad. Look at everything that happened: the Industrial Revolution, philosophy, the rise of the
those
machines,
happened in
internet, in spite of government. People. It's the association of us with government, or us with the ruling class, right? But we are fundamentally separate. We have different motives and different incentives, and so it's very dangerous when you align yourself with sociopathic megalomaniacs. And I just gotta tell people, stop doing that, please. You're not like that. Do you kill somebody and say it was war? It was war. I had to do it. Like, do you rob someone? I'm just taxing you. Stop resisting.
Newspeak is alive and well.
It is. So thank you very much, everyone, for awesome conversation, and thank you, everyone, for listening to the Seeds of Liberty podcast. And if you want to learn more, please visit our website, theseedsofliberty.com. And if you want to donate some fiat currency, please, you can do so on PayPal, or you can also donate through Bitcoin. We would never turn down some voluntary donations. That's the way wonderful projects thrive and grow and flourish.
Next week we're going to have our friend Adrian on to talk about homeschooling with Jeremy and Danilo. I'm thinking I might sit out for that one. I don't know. We'll see. I don't really have a lot of input when it comes to homeschooling, but next week we're going to be talking about unschooling, homeschooling, whatnot with Adrian, who homeschools his kids. Jeremy is going to be homeschooling his kids at one point, and Danilo is currently homeschooling, correct? Well, we'll be soon.
I'm kind of with Jeremy too. Yeah, we're basically
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
that'll be a good for you guys to ask him questions. You know, he'll be able to answer a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so if nobody else gets anything out of next week's episode, I know I will.
No, it's gonna be great. So he's been doing it for a while, right?
Yeah, he's got a 15-year-old. So
wow,
I believe he's homeschooled that person the whole time. I could be wrong.
Okay,
yeah.
Awesome.
So, but that's going to be episode 8 next week, and it will be episode 7. I'm bad at math.
That government schooling, I'm telling you.
You know, especially in Alabama, it was just I never had a chance.
Dave was one of the lowest that everyone had to, you know, what's it called? Marksism, Markism, right? Marksism, where everyone brings their grades down to the lowest common denominators.
I actually was not that person. But.
Marxism.
Nice. So awesome. So we're looking forward to that wonderful conversation next week. I know I am. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. This is the Seize Liberty podcast, and we'll see you all next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening, guys.